Joining us now for the interview tonight is former Attorney General of the United States, Eric Holder. Mr. Attorney General, it's really nice to see you. Thank you very much for being here.
Glad to be here with you, Rachel.
So I have a million things I want to talk to you about, as you might expect. I first want to get your reaction tonight to what we've seen from the Supreme Court. There's this young man from Maryland, a father who was arrested by the Trump administration. They sent him to a prison in El Salvador. They say it was in error, but also they have no intention of getting him back. The Supreme Court appears to have ruled tonight that they must bring him back, but also the ruling is sort of hard to parse. I don't know if you've had a chance to look at it yet or what your reaction is to it, but I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, I've not had a chance to read thoroughly the opinion, but I think you can boil it down, and people, as lawyers do, we can start to parse words here and there. But I think what the court is essentially saying is that, look, you admit that you made a mistake. You took this guy without due process, placed him in a detention facility in El Salvador, and are now saying that you can't get him back. That is unacceptable. That this man is entitled to due process. A determination has to be made as to whether or not he can be deported from the United States, and through due process, that is going through the court system, he has to have the ability to put forth any arguments that he has, and then a judge is going to have to make a determination. I think that is the clear input. That's the clear, that's the obvious thing that the Supreme Court is saying. The question is going to be now, how will the Trump administration react to that? The court talks about facilitating. How are they going to, interpret that? Are they going to do it over the course of the next couple of days, the next month? And I wouldn't be surprised if we end up yet with another proceeding before the district court saying Supreme Court said the client had to be brought back. He's not here. We demand to have him brought back as soon as is possible.
I want to ask you to reflect a little bit on what we're seeing in terms of the treatment of immigrants right now. I feel like, I'm not a lawyer. I'm a person who pays attention to the news and reports the news as best I can. But I feel like my sort of moral tuning fork, I guess it is resonating so hard I can hardly stand it in terms of the way that immigrants are being treated in one policy decision after another that all seem to rely on this basic sense that when it comes to the treatment of immigrants, there's really no law that constrains what the administration can do. And so you're seeing student visas revoked, which they have the right to do, but you're seeing students not notified of that. And the first time they find out about it is when they're snatched off the street, thrown into an unmarked car, and put into a prison when they had no idea they'd done anything wrong. Tonight, we're seeing we're seeing some of the fallout from this El Salvador decision to put people who've had no legal process whatsoever in a foreign prison with no recourse to American justice or even to answer to the non-charges against them. We're seeing reporting from the New York Times tonight that people who registered and are in this country officially and essentially with the permission of the U.S. government under the CBP-1 app, they're having their Social Security numbers revoked, which instantly makes them not only liable to arrest and deportation, but also makes it impossible for them to continue to live in this country in any legal sense. All of this just feels like they believe no law constrains them when it comes to people who aren't U.S. citizens. And there's more that I could add to that universe. But what is your reflection on that in terms of us as a country and how the administration is treating these people among us?
Let's cut right through this. This is disgusting. It's shameful. It's inconsistent with the rule of law. And it's also inconsistent with who we say we are as a nation. And every American citizen, every inhabitant of this country should be offended by what this administration is doing. But beyond that, every citizen in this country ought to be afraid. Because the reality is, if they are successful in doing this to immigrants, and now they're doing things against American citizens, as you talked about before, who criticized the president, it won't be too long. And the president himself has said he had no objections to taking convicted criminals and putting them in the same jail in El Salvador. There's a treadmill that we're potentially getting on here that could result in the erosion of rights for American citizens. Now, I'm not saying that's the only reason that we should be concerned about this. People who are in this country deserve the ability to go before courts and have courts make determinations about whether they can stay, whether they should leave, how they should be treated. And this administration wants to take upon itself, to the derogation of the ability of the courts and certainly of the legislative branch, the ability to decide everything. This is how you get authoritarianism. This is remarkably similar to kind of what happened in Europe in the 30s. It's consistent with what we saw happen in Hungary and in Turkey in later days over the course of the last 10, 15, 20 years. And that's not a path that this country wants to go down. And I want people to understand this. If you don't stand up and fight now, if you don't take a position now, it's going to be too late. We can't say we can wait just a little longer. No. No, the time is now to stand up and do all that we can to fight this administration. Now.
Do you believe that the lawyers in this country, particularly the private sector lawyers of big firms, are doing enough to stand up for the people who are at the sharp end of the stick with this administration? And I do mean the people who have been treated the worst. I mean immigrants, and I mean the trans community, and I mean other people who have just had rights stripped from them even more aggressively than the rest of the country is experiencing. I feel like we're not seeing a rush to the barricades on behalf of the legal community in the way that we did in the first Trump administration, and I think that's because the legal community, big law in particular, is afraid of Trump and is trying to appease him rather than confront him. I wonder if you share that view.
Yeah, some are doing, I think, the right thing. Some are being timid. Some are showing themselves to be cowards. Some are making business determinations when they ought to be making legal decisions or putting into their decision-making a sense of moral obligation. And I've been disappointed by some in the legal profession about the ways in which they have interacted with this administration. You can't make deals with these folks. This is an attack on the rule of law. They want to go after people who are their critics. They want to go after people who would defend those people, that is, the lawyers. They want to have a Justice Department that fires lawyers who tell the truth to judges. They want to then go after the judges themselves. This is all part of a piece. It's all about the erosion of the rule of law so that Donald Trump will have the ability to have authoritarian powers in this nation. This is the person who the founders tried to put a system in place to prevent from coming to power. And unless we as lawyers stand up, joined by the judiciary, and somehow get Congress to find out that it has power within our system of government, we will lose that which defines this nation, that which makes this nation exceptional. That is really what is at stake. But you have to get granular. And every lawyer, I think, has to ask him or herself, every law firm has to ask itself, where do we stand? You know, it was an easy thing after George Floyd was murdered, when we had a videotape of a black man with a cop with his knee on that man's throat as he was pleading for his life. It was an easy thing at that point, as horrible as that was, an easy thing to come and say that we are against that, we are for the rule of law, people like that cop need to be held accountable. Now it's not so easy. Now it's difficult. And as Tom Paine said, you know, this is not the day of the Sunshine Patriot. Oh, this is the day of the Sunshine Patriot. We have to make sure that when it gets tough, we're prepared to do the difficult things. Some, unfortunately, I think too many have made the determination that they're not willing to make the necessary sacrifices for the very system that has sustained them, not only economically, but given them privileges that we as lawyers have. It is our responsibility to stand up for the rule of law.
I hear the urgency in your voice there. I also believe that those who have made the weak decision thus far should know that it isn't a decision forever, and they can turn around. They can recognize that they were wrong and turn that around. Mr. Attorney General, if you wouldn't mind holding on for one more moment, I have a lot more to ask you. Can you stick with us?
Sure.
All right, we'll be right back with more with former Attorney General Eric Holder. Stay with us.
I really didn't realize until I saw Justice Sotomayor laying it out in her supplementary finding to the Chief Justice's ruling today, that what they're arguing is that they can do this to any one of us
So, a lot of times people accuse the media of hyperbole.
Yeah.
There is no hyperbole here. It is everything that you said, and it's actually more, because in the case of Mr. Garcia, he actually had a court ruling that he could stay here. That had been adjudicated. And so this was in violation of that court order. So yes, it's absolutely true that the position is that, but if you put the two cases together, the government was arguing they could snatch anyone in this country, remove them without due process. And even if it's a mistake, this is the callousness, even where it's a conceded mistake, that person can rot in jail as a result of the United States making a mistake, and they would have no obligation to lift a finger. So this is both, as we now know from the Supreme Court in 2 unanimous losses for the Trump administration, that is not the law of this country, that these people are, and anyone is entitled to due process, to a hearing. And in this case, if you make the mistake, you have to facilitate, of course, what any decent human being would automatically think to themselves, which is, how do you rectify it? That I can't get over that this is beyond just the law point, which is, what kind of human being sits in their office, realizes the mistake happened, and remember, Mr. Garcia is still in jail in El Salvador because of our mistake, and the Department of Justice's position is we're not lifting a finger unless the court actually requires us to. That is what is so remarkable when you think about what it means to be an American in this country.
Well, yes, and what we don't know is if in the end of this process, the court, backed by the Supreme Court, orders the return of this one person, we don't know that the Trump government will follow that order. And there will be absolutely nothing that any judge in this country can do to force Donald Trump to get that person out of that prison.
Well, this is what I would say with respect to that eventuality. This administration wants to say that they are all powerful and they have so much clout around the world. They can't get this person back from El Salvador. We're paying that prison to house these people. They're going to actually take the position in front of a court that the almighty Trump administration doesn't have the power to effectuate his return. I mean, that seems pretty laughable. Let's wait and see. But that's going to have to be their position if they don't want to return him.
So what do you make of the Chief Justice's remand, his specific instructions, in effect, to the district court judge?
So, one of the things that a district court judge can do here in light of that is, remember, the district court judge didn't have a factual hearing. And the district judge can say, I want to have a factual hearing. If you are saying I can only take these steps and not more, let's have a factual hearing. Let's hear from the people. Let's hear from Marco Rubio. Let's hear about why it is that Kristi Noem could go there. What kind of contract do you have with them? I mean, all of the things that are very public, that don't get into foreign relations, and have a hearing about it. I mean, this is one where it's so unbelievable that you wouldn't think that a humane person and an adult in the room wouldn't say, somebody is in jail because of my mistake. How do you fix it? But also, I think at this point, they'd really have to lie through their teeth in order to try and convince a judge that they don't have the power to effectuate his return. And so, I'm what I'd say is cautiously optimistic that it would be quite a hard road. It's not, I won't put it past them, but I think it would be very, very hard, not to say, unconscionable, to take the position that you couldn't effectuate his return.
We're seeing one of the differences here between the first Trump presidency and the second Trump presidency. In the first Trump presidency, there were people down the chain of the command from the president, including frequently in the White House Chief of Staff's desk, who would not do what he wanted them to do. They absolutely would not do it. And here you have, apparently straight down the line, people who will do exactly what he wants to do. And one of the Trump principles is you never admit you were wrong. You never admit it was a mistake. In fact, they have fired the Justice Department lawyer who admitted in an earlier proceeding that this was a mistake. You get fired for that. And so actually acting on the mistake and doing what normal people, decent human beings do about a mistake is something Donald Trump's incapable of. And now he has in place an attorney general and everyone down the line who I absolutely adhere to that position that they will never, ever, ever admit a mistake and act to correct it.
There's a sign of, I couldn't agree with you more, and there's a sign of that from the statement that was issued tonight in light of the Supreme Court ruling, which basically says, look, the court vindicated the fact that we have, absolute, a sort of hegemony when it comes to foreign affairs. And that just struck me as nobody wanted to actually just tell Donald Trump, you lost again 9-0. I mean, like, this is what you're supposed to do in an adult administration, is you've got to be candid with everyone who's there, including your ultimate boss. And that statement was just so unrealistic in light of what it is that the court ruled. And, this is one where we have now seen in 1 week the Supreme Court of the United States, this Supreme Court, the one that granted him presidential immunity, ruled 9-0 in 2 cases on this key issue about the power to deport people, saying, that is not how the Constitution works. So they join many, many judges that have found this administration violating due process, the Fifth Amendment, the Fourth Amendment, the First Amendment, and then a whole litany of congressional statutes. I mean, it is a remarkable panoply of lawlessness that has been found by the courts here. And if they continue with this sort of like we're just going to ignore it and not speak truth to power, I think you're going to see more of these kinds of decisions from the Supreme Court that are unanimous. Remember, that's this Supreme Court ruling in this way in this case. And it tells you it's a sign of where we are in terms of this administration.
It was another bad day for the markets amid worsening trade tensions with China, wiping out much of yesterday's gain after the president announced the 90-day pause on tariffs. At a cabinet meeting this afternoon, the president said he was not tracking a fall in the stock market, even as the market declined all around him, with the S&P 500 down more than 3%. Stocks tumbled after the White House clarified that its tariff on all Chinese goods is at least 145%, even higher than previously believed. On Wednesday, Trump pulled back on a series of harsh tariffs, escalating his trade war with China, but lowering many of the tariffs he had just imposed on the rest of the world. As NBC put it, Liberation Day just gave way to Capitulation Day. Or, as the Wall Street Journal put it, he blinked. Trump indeed is the only one who blinked, while China, Canada, Mexico, and the European Union did not. Trump is creating an illusion, folks, that he holds all the cards. But the truth is, that's increasingly clear. He does not hold that much, if anything at all. But according to the White House, there's really nothing to see here.
Up 2, down 1 is not a bad ratio, or up 10, down 5. And I think, as we have talked about, as we go through the queue and settle with these countries who are going to bring us their best offers, we will end up in a place of great certainty over the next 90 days on tariffs. We had very good inflation numbers today. Oil's down. We had a successful bond market, so I don't see anything unusual today.
I don't know what his definition of unusual is, but okay. Joining me now is CNBC senior analyst Ron Insana, and back with me is MSNBC political analyst and former Republican Congressman Carlos Curbelo of Florida. So here's the deal. The House budget framework that we saw passed today extends the 2017 tax cuts. So that's $3.8 trillion. Additional tax cuts of $1.5 trillion. Increased spending of $521 billion for border, defense, immigration. Spending cuts, mutual agreement, $1.5 trillion. Total cost, $6.9 trillion over 10 years and $38 trillion more from 2035 to 2055. I don't understand what the number, how the math works there, Mr. Insana. Tell me, please, what we got.
I wish I could. I mean, assuming that we're going to cut $1.5 trillion from the federal budget over any period of time. And I don't know if that's a 10-year figure or an immediate figure, but in order to cut $1.5 trillion from the federal budget in the short run, you would be attacking either entitlements, defense spending, or interest on the federal debt, which now tops $1 trillion. So I don't know how you get to those numbers. In any case, even if they cut federal spending, the deficit and the national debt will increase over time. And there are a variety of other proposals that are looped in there for which there is no math. There's one game that's being played in Congress right now where they're essentially saying that the tax cut extensions, because they don't change the baseline assumptions on spending going forward, means that the tax cuts cost nothing or will add nothing to the deficit and debt over time. It's the parliamentarian would have to rule on that, but it's a pretty slick trick to try when we know, in fact, deficits and debt will go up with this particular package of proposals.
Well, that's exactly it. The math still maths, no matter what you say. I mean, Carlos, come on, help me out here. Look, let's just do a comparison, right? Let's go just take a quick snapshot of how stocks have performed since January through this week. There it is. In January, around the 7th of the month, look at where the stocks were. The NASDAQ, right? All of these stocks were Dow Jones today down 7, SPY down 10, NASDAQ down 15%. So the math is the math. And to Ron's point, no matter what you say or how you dress it up, you still got to pay for all of this.
Well, Michael, and the beauty and the painful thing about markets is that they don't lie.
They don't.
They react and they look forward. They react and they predict based on facts, based on evidence. And I know this is a political show, but I think viewers are going to have to start becoming comfortable with this concept of bond yields.
Yes.
And what they mean.
Yes.
Okay, because bond yields.
Ron just tuned into the conversation when you said
and he can explain it.
God bless any politician who acknowledges the bond market's role in the economy and the importance of the signal sending message that comes from interest rates. And the fact that they are going up in an environment when we're facing the possibility of a downturn in the economy tells us a lot about what investors think of these various programs that are being put into place.
Joining me now, Democratic strategist, former senior aide for the Hillary Clinton campaign and host of Here Comes the Pain podcast, Joel Payne. Here Comes the Pain feels like it's a name for our days. MSNBC host, associate editor at the Washington Post, my good friend Jonathan Capehart. Joel, can we talk optics here of any presidential contender being seen in the Oval Office with Trump? Does it outweigh any claims of trying to work together for the common good?
Oh, Chris, look, I'm sure that's not going to be running in any campaign ads for Gretchen Whitmer for any upcoming elections. I do think Democrats need to keep the main thing the main thing.
By her opposition, that's the question.
Yeah, for sure. Democrats need to keep the main thing the main thing here. The story of this week is not Gretchen Whitmer doing her job as governor of Michigan, representing her constituents. The story of the week is Donald Trump's chaotic tariff policy. And I think most Democrats who are in the know understand that that is what we need to get in front of voters. Look, Democrats in different positions, whether in office or out of office, are going to have different takes on this, and that's okay. There's room in the big tent for that. I think as long as Democrats understand telling a consistent story to voters about Trump's chaotic policy, that's the most important thing.
Yeah, and I think, Jonathan, for a lot of folks, it was acquiescence that they saw, fairly or unfairly, right? I mean, she has a right to go and talk about the auto industry, which is a main driver of the economy in her state. But these are the kinds of images that can live on for years, often in campaigns ads. Whitmer's office says she was surprised that she was brought into the Oval Office. She didn't know what was going to be going on there. She didn't know the subject matter. Is that response fine? Should she not address it further? It will go away, or will it haunt her?
I think it will haunt her. I mean, the moment you start explaining why you were there in the Oval Office with the President of the United States, particularly this President of the United States, you're already in trouble. Look, I agree with Joel. The governor was doing what a governor is supposed to do. She has to run her state. She has to talk to, there are things she needs from the federal government that the president can unlock. And so I agree with Joel. In the grand scheme of things, we've got to cut her some slack. However, there is a 2028 presidential race that's coming, and Democrats are champing at the bit. And so they're looking for any and every advantage. And what I do think is happening here with Governor Whitmer is that she's had this air of invincibility, and this dings that air of invincibility, that she made what seems like an error, a mistake, being played by the president. She was supposed to have a meeting with the president. I can understand being surprised, being called into the Oval Office, but at a certain point, he's like, oh God, I can't, oh, I'm sorry, can we delay this? Being a little more savvy, because President Trump is incredibly good at using Democrats for his own political purposes while at the same time hurting them.
Yeah, and maybe that signals that he sees her as a formidable potential candidate. But Joel, this Whitmer meeting with Trump, obviously part of trying to build her reputation as more of a center-left moderate, Midwestern constituency. But she's not the only one that's being talked about, right, already for 2028. Pressure is building, according to the LA Times, on Kamala Harris. Make a decision. Are you going to run for president again? Or are you going to run for governor of California, which is a much more immediate race that a lot of people are waiting to see what she does before they decide what they're going to do? Is the clock ticking for her?
I think if the clock is ticking for anybody in April of 2025, we got bigger problems than whether or not Kamala Harris is going to run. It's a long time before anyone's in front of any voters. Look, I think Vice President Harris has a lot of options in front of her. And she's got a lot of Democrats, by the way, who, despite the defeat last November, feel really good about her, both in her home state in California and across the country. But you know, Democrats are probably going to be in a place where they're going to be considering potential 2028 candidates a lot earlier than they normally would. I worked the 2008 presidential cycle where it was Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton, John Edwards, Joe Biden, et cetera. This cycle coming up reminds me of what that cycle was. You will see lots of Democrats jump in. You will see lots of big names. And I think there will be lots of formidable Democrats that are making moves early, whether it's J.B. Pritzker, Gavin Newsom. We talked about Gretchen Whitmer, Kamala Harris. The list goes on, Raphael Warnock, so on and so forth. And I think you're going to see lots of Democrats start to make those moves. But maybe we're a little bit too early, 5 months out from the last election.
Okay, well, let's talk about who's not going to run. Michelle Obama. I mean, she is consistently one of the, if not the most popular Democrat alive. And she said again, no, I'm not running for anything. But she also she also smacked down divorce rumors that grew out of her not attending the inauguration or Jimmy Carter's funeral. Here's what she said.
We, as women, I think we struggle with like disappointing people.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, so much so that this year people were, you know, they couldn't even fathom that I was making a choice for myself, that they had to assume that my husband and I are divorcing. You know, this couldn't be a grown woman just making a set of decisions for herself. Right.
Right.
John, I played that not to answer rumors about them getting a divorce, but to ask you a question about women running for president. And high-profile women, are we still at a point where they have to answer for making their own decisions?
Clearly we are. We have gone through 2 presidential election cycles with a woman at the top of the Democratic ticket. and they both lost. So this country clearly has an issue, needs to have a conversation with itself when it comes to whether it's ready for a woman to be president of the United States. But I want to go back to Michelle Obama for a second, because I don't want to lose sight of the fact of what she's saying here. Just because she doesn't go to a funeral does not mean that there are problems with her marriage. If anything, what she's saying is, I was about to curse, I'm a grown blank woman. I am independent of my husband. I have my own thoughts. I have my own things that I want to do. And this realm of politics over here, y'all knew for 8 years when I was in the White House, I didn't like politics. You keep asking me to run for president. How many times do I have to say I am not interested?
And maybe just possibly, is she so popular because that is who people know she is?
Exactly. And let's not forget, when Hillary Clinton left the Obama administration, she had a 60% approval rating. The moment she got into the race for president.
Important reminder. Jonathan Capehart, Joel Payne, good to see you both.
Did Trump give us any more information on tariffs, on next steps, on where all this is going?
Well, a little bit, Christina. The president did not rule out extending this 90-day pause if he is still negotiating with these countries and still potentially trying to strike a deal. But he also said that he would not extend the pause just for the sake of it, or try to get a deal just for the sake of it. That's what the White House is trying to stress today, that after days of mixed messaging, the point is of all this is trying to strike a deal. Now, interestingly, the president was asked to comment on the drop in the stock market today. He said he hadn't seen it because he had been in that cabinet meeting for 2.5 hours. He was also asked about one retaliatory measure that China took today. Listen to his response.
Mr. President, China retaliated today by reducing the number of American films that can be shown there. What's your reaction to them now targeting cultural exports from the United States?
I think I've heard of worse things.
So there you see the president laughing that off. Earlier in the day, we heard from White House officials that said that there are about 15 countries that are in active negotiations right now. Still unclear whether they will be able to come to any sort of deal. But this comes after the administration, had been saying that 1.50 at 1.75 countries had reached out. This morning, we learned in terms of active negotiations, just 15 at this point, Christina.
All right, from this cabinet meeting to Capitol Hill, Ryan, I want to ask you, what is the future of this budget blueprint that was adopted today? What are the next steps? Do we know where it's going?
Well, it's a long process still, Christina, and there could be many pitfalls that congressional Republicans face along the way. They basically just have an outline, a sketch right now of what their goals are on spending and the cuts that they'd like to make. But even those are not necessarily those targets that they hope to ultimately hit. Republicans in both the House and Senate would like to make cuts in the range of $1.5 to $2 trillion, which is not what it specifically spells out in this budget resolution that they passed here today. But the Speaker of the House, the Senate Majority Leader, have essentially given a pinky swear to these House Republicans in particular that want to see those steep cuts, that when the final reconciliation package comes to bear, that those cuts will exist. Now, that's not going to be easy because they also have to pass what they're hoping would be a $4.5 trillion extension of the Trump tax cuts. They've promised that they're not going to touch the benefits to entitlement programs like Medicaid. It's really hard to make that math work and do so in a way that doesn't blow a huge hole in the deficit. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done here. They got over this step, but many House Republicans are already saying that they were willing to do this because it's not final and not binding. But when the actual final product comes to bear, they want to see those steep cuts. And if they don't, there'll be a no vote. So the Speaker and the President both have a lot of work still to do, Christina.
Yeah, when it comes to cutting without touching those entitlements, the math isn't really mathing, as the kids would say. Ashley, I want to dig into this with you because Speaker Johnson barely got this blueprint over the finish line, and 2 Republican holdouts still voted no. Do you think Johnson can accomplish all of the agenda items Trump wants with this small of a congressional majority? We heard Johnson say earlier today the president was hands off. He let him handle it. He let him wrangle his own party. But do you think he can get this done, or do you think he's going to face even greater opposition down the line?
Again, some of this is unknowable, but what's striking to me, what people in the president's orbit have told me, is that because Trump now, just to go back a little bit, has sort of executed a complete takeover of the Republican Party, that when there is a moment like this where he needs people on Capitol Hill, and I'm talking about the president now, not Speaker Johnson, to do something for him, or he wants to lean on them, a lot of these, almost every single person at this point has a personal relationship with him. Many of them fear him, and a significant number believe that they owe their actual seat in part to something he did on their behalf in the primary, in the general election, some sort of support. And that has proven effective up until this point. But again, I think the question you're asking and the question for Speaker Johnson is we are seeing now the limits of that. And it's been interesting to see some of these House Republicans reassert traditional conservative values, which is not just adding and adding to the debt and deficit, which have really fallen by the wayside in Trump's takeover of the party until right about now.
And Annie, the White House is also trying to frame this tariff pause as essentially a win. Do you think that's going to fly? Are people going to buy that? Or is the U.S. still going to take a loss from this policy, even if it was only in place for a couple hours?
The tariff pause is not really a pause. The tariffs, as announced yesterday, are not materially smaller than the tariffs that were announced last week. This is an 145% tariff on China and a 10% tariff on every single other American trading partner. And we have new numbers from the Budget Lab at Yale this morning that estimates in the near term, this is effectively a $4,400 tax hike on every single American household. So if you're in a world where the economy is already slowing down, this is going to have a profound effect on consumer spending and a profound effect on tens of thousands of American businesses.
And that pause also did not apply to those pre-existing tariffs on things like auto imports. Those are still in place as well. Ashley, so Trump's handling of this rollout and then reversal was not well received by the markets and even by some of his supporters. Here's how CNBC senior economics reporter Steve Leisman put it. Have a listen.
I remember the night before the tariffs were imposed and the day and that day, and I asked our great White House reporter Megan Casella why we had heard nothing of the plan. And the reason I asked is it because they don't know or they're not saying? And what we found out since is they didn't know. The plan was made up that day. It was not nobody on Wall Street. They didn't run it by Wall Street. They didn't run it by business leaders and CEOs. And now you could argue, after withering punishment from markets, from bond markets, trillions lost across the globe, the president, he didn't just flinch, but he ducked when it came to what was coming his way here.
I mean, the White House, in turn, is kind of implying that maybe this was the plan all along. They've focused on these deals. Countries are coming to us. They're saying they're making deals. Lots of deals are going to get better deals. You know, is that enough spin, do you think, to get most of his supporters to stay on the Trump train? Or do you think this is going to be in the back of people's minds, especially in the financial sector? And they may be going along for the ride, but, you know, they're keeping one eye on that little chart that shows you where the exits are.
Right. Well, the White House's spin is certainly this is the art of the deal. This is the master. But that defies credulity when not just from our inside reporting at The Atlantic and elsewhere, but just from watching the public facing facts. What's interesting is this is one of the first moments, and we're still early into Trump's return to power, that has really felt like his first term, right? With the chaos, with the infighting, with the aides behind the scenes, you know, scrambling to convince a president to do something they want him to do, to avoid something they believe could be catastrophic. You have Elon Musk attacking, you know, a trade guru for Trump, Peter Navarro, publicly. Again, these were all hallmarks of the first term, which, as Trump himself and his team and advisors would say, was not a well-oiled machine. So do Trump supporters stay on board? I think it's a little too early to tell. But what's interesting is you're hearing from a lot of these voters and people who represent these voters who maybe voted for a Democrat for Senate or governor and the president for president in 2024, that there's real concerns and that this is already starting to trickle down, as Annie has written, in the Atlantic to small businesses, right, where uncertainty is a problem for them and who they fear that we're going to do this all again in 90 days after this pause. And maybe again and again and again until his term is up. And that's not good for small businesses. That's not good for the markets. That's not good for certainty. And that's not good for the president's credibility.
Annie, can you talk to us about what that uncertainty does for the market? I mean, I was reading that people now who are businesses, they're trying to put in their purchase orders for holiday shopping, for, their big time when they sell a lot of goods. And this uncertainty it's paralytic for a lot of small and medium-sized businesses. But overall, as you just heard Ashley talking about, if we're going to be back here in 3 months, what does that kind of uncertainty do to the market? And what does it do to America's place in the fabric of the international financial system?
Absolutely. When you talk to business owners, manufacturers who understand that the White House wants them to reshore manufacturing, essentially say that would be so expensive and difficult to do that they would rather wait out the Trump administration than do it in some cases. Smaller businesses, retailers are figuring out how much to stockpile, what countries to buy from. Countries that use parts and products that are produced in China are figuring out ways to ship those items through second countries like Vietnam in order to avoid the China tariff. It is chaos. And every single business owner that I have talked to that works with any kind of imported part or imported good is doing the same thing. It's making it extraordinarily difficult for them to figure out their math for this year. And many of them are delaying hiring or even letting workers go simply because this is such an impossible problem to figure out. The notion that this is going to happen again in 90 days or whenever Trump decides it will is contributing to that uncertainty. It is impossible for business owners to effectively manage their businesses in this environment.
And Annie, quickly, before I let you go here, we heard Gabe talking about this cabinet meeting. And during the cabinet meeting, Trump said he wants to make a deal with China. He thinks he can make a deal with China. But if you're looking at, a game of protracted economic chicken between the U.S. and China, who wins, or rather, who loses worse?
It's really a situation in which everybody loses. Foreign countries have no idea what the Trump administration wants from them in many cases. He's violated 14 free trade agreements. He's about to undergo simultaneous negotiations with more than 90 of our major trading partners and trading blocs. It's going to be very difficult to do. And we've seen really nonsensical demands. Is the point to raise a lot of revenue? Is the point to stop drug trafficking? I don't think that people really know. Is the point to eliminate all of our bilateral trade differences? Those are all completely different policy objectives. And so I think that if you have something that you're negotiating for, you need to put out what that is if you're going to have a good faith negotiation. And I think that we saw in the first Trump term that, they renegotiated NAFTA and created the USMCA. It was largely just NAFTA. It was the same thing. There wasn't a sense of what we really wanted. And so we had this period of disruption and a lot of tariffs, and we ended up with mostly the same policy. I wouldn't be surprised if the same thing happened this time, except on a much grander scale.